I'm originally from a major city in southern Ohio, and outside of town there are a number of smaller townships. One of these is known as the more country bumpkin redneck grit part of town. It's not even in the same county, but is part of the general area my city is though of as. In the woods, there's this legend of Hell's Church, supposedly an old church that burned down where Satanists do rituals now. Or a Satanist church that burned down by a ritual. Depending on who you ask, there are a number of Hell's Church myths in Ohio in many different places, but this one was closest to us, and a number of my guy friends decided they wanted to be ghost hunters and check out haunted place around where we lived. We were juniors in high school, and while all of us obviously thought this was just stupid bullshit, we thought it was funny to go out and scare ourselves. Plus, most people had cars or driver's licenses by now, so we were enjoying a new burst of freedom. I'm a scaredy cat about most stuff like this, but I was the most tomboyish girl in the group, and always kinda wanted to be able to hang with the guys. Plus some of the girls in the group, who I was closer to, were going, so I didn't want to look like a loser or a pussy. So one day in November, we decided we were going to go out one night and try and find this church. We had actually been to this location once before that fall, but one of my friends had a curfew, so after exploring an old barn and the railroad tracks on a bridge nearby, we left. We hadn't found the church, supposedly just a chimney at this point, to our disappointment and my mild relief. We took 2 cars out there, going past more populous parts of our city and back to this woodsy area. I can't honestly tell you how we got out there, but I know it's off a state highway, then an abandoned access road, past some old warehouse, and then down a dirt road. Once you get down the dirt road, there's a kinda thicker part of the road early on where we parked cars off of the shoulder. We did this because the road thins out and becomes impossible to drive down. And also, someone clearly owns this land, and later down the road there is some no trespassing signage. I'm sure a ton of kids come back here, so it didn't seem odd to me that they wanted to block this place off. I barely thought twice about it at the time. We get out of our cars and start walking towards the dirt road, wandering off the path from time to time to check out barns or clearings where we thought the chimney might be. At first, it was just scary because it was dark and old or whatever, but then the barns started to get weirder. Like they were filled with weird spray painting symbols and bullshit. But that's not what bothered us. We figured whoever was there before us did it, which I still 100% believe. But also other things, like dead owls that looked like they had been opened up, though they were dried out and decomposed by the time we got there. Thank God. And other bits that looked like they might have come from animals. I was grossed out, but we all kind of agreed that these probably came from the same teenagers trying to fake a satanic ritual, or that the animals got trapped in the falling apart barn and died in there, to be picked apart by other animals. My friends are now hardcore, trying to find this stupid chimney, so they keep taking off through the trees into clearings. Myself and the other 2 girls who were there kind of hung back on the tree line for most of them, getting a little more nervous and a little irritated with all the coming up empty. As we keep going, we find a bike on the tree line, like a bike that maybe a 12-year-old would ride. That's a little creepy, but fine, whatever. Probably belonged to someone who owned the land. We decide we are going to go a little further, and soon enough, we find another bike. This one is older, just a little bit more rusted, but still undersized. We didn't talk too much about the other bike, just kind of mumbling that it's probably still nothing. One or two of the four guys who were there are kind of trying to jump it up, saying,
"These kids probably got murdered,"
or stuff like that, but no one is really having it. By this point, we've been here for about 2 hours, and it's getting really late. Plus, I think we were all a little more creeped out than we wanted to admit. We decide to head back to the cars, and I'm feeling relieved, happy to be headed back to my house and the fuck out of here. But things never work out that way, do they? By the cars, we see a road that goes straight up a hill through the trees. At the start of it, there's a big metal gate that had a road closed sign on it, which we had seen before, but for some reason, it had never occurred to us to try and go up the road. We had a small debate at the gate about an even-ish split on who wanted to venture up and who didn't. I absolutely didn't, but eventually we decide we'll go up just to see. Both of the drivers want to go, so there's not a lot we can do about it. We climb over the gate and start up the hill, where an old pavement road is cracked and crumbled under our feet, though it was for sure a real asphalt road at some point. In addition to the road condition and the brush being an obstacle, someone had felled a bunch of trees over the path, purposely blocking off the road from any cars. Some of us are starting to seriously question if we should be doing this, arguing that someone obviously wanted to keep us out of here, but we get teased for being afraid and keep going. I couldn't see where the road would end. Because it was so dark, we had a few flashlights, but it wasn't doing us much good, and the tree made it hard to see. Plus, the road was super steep, so all you could really see was up, with a little moonlight peeking through the trees. All of a sudden, though, we reach the end. The trees just open up, and we have come off the incline to a flat field. And holy fuck, what a sight it was. It's the flat field with tall prairie grass on either side, probably 2 to 3 feet high, and pretty uniform. The path we are on splits the large clearing we are in down the center, and leads through the grass to a cul-de-sac with 3 buildings. 2 look like they are farmhouses, with 1 barnish building. They were wood, and while they may have been painted at one point, it looked like they had been mostly weathered and stripped by time. I see this, and I am done. I want to leave. But of course some of my friends say that we have to check out these buildings. At this point, I finally put down my foot, as do the other 2 girls and one of our guy friends, who decided this is enough for him. He was our valedictorian, so maybe he was just smarter. So the 3 guys who want to go to the buildings tell us to just wait there. And while we don't want to be in this field out in the open, we decide we can't just leave them. At this point, we've turned off our flashlights because the moonlight is so strong. The 3 of them take off down the little path, and the 4 of us who remain stand together, bitching about how stupid our friends are and making small talk. None of us say it, but we are all looking to the grass every now and again, worried something is going to jump out. It's just so creepy, this abandoned little settlement. It feels like our friends are gone forever. We see them get to a building and go inside. It was unlocked, I guess. We can see the flicker of their flashlights in the windows, and I just remember feeling so tense. It was like watching a horror movie in real life. After maybe 10 minutes, though it could have been just a tense 5, we see our guy friends coming towards us, lightly jogging, looking afraid for the first time all night. "You idiots went inside?" I said, pissed off at them. One of my friends just looks at us, and I'll never forget it.
It was full of bikes. Just bikes chained to the walls.
We didn't believe them. Kept waiting for them to say they were kidding, but they insisted. Said it was like they were just storing a bunch of bikes there, most of them smaller. They looked afraid, and as much as I didn't want to believe them, I did. They aren't the type of guys to pull a prank for this long. By then, we can all agree we need to get the fuck out of there, and we start down the hill, hurrying the best we can. All of a sudden, about halfway down the field, we can see a car's headlights down the hill, about where our cars are. We see them pass slowly, and we know someone is down there looking for us. Because it's so far off the beaten path, we figure it's one of two things. One, the cops, and we're gonna be fucked for trespassing. Or two, the people who own this land, or these houses or something, and they are going to A, call the cops, or B, murder us. We know that the road isn't that long, so they'll be turning around, circling back soon enough, and because our cars are there, they'll probably wait for us. We're all whispering about this as we pick up the pace, sprinting down the hill as fast as we can. I'm not a good runner, but I was hauling ass, getting down as fast as I could, basically hurting over the fallen trees. Once we get down the hill, we don't see any headlights, but we know they can't be far away.
Get in the fucking cars!
One of our friends yells, and we are fumbling with the doors like a horror movie, just too nervous to get in the cars. We get in, and just as we start the cars up, we see the headlights speeding down the road, a giant black truck roaring up behind us. The truck seemed larger than life, raised up off the ground. The whole thing was terrifying, but extra terrifying was that we couldn't see who was driving in the dark and with the headlights blinding us. We peel the absolute shit out of there. Total pedal to the metal. This truck is still following us, bearing down on us as our two cars race out of there. The car is also getting real close to us, threateningly close, almost like it was trying to run us off the road. We're all screaming, looking back at the truck, fighting for some distance. Once we get to the highway, we're switching lanes, trying to escape. Luckily, we were in sedans, so it was easy for us to weave in and out of traffic. But this truck is still chasing us. We're in two different lanes, but don't want to get too separated from our friends. The passengers of both cars are texting back and forth, trying to make a plan. It took us about 15 minutes to lose the truck. I'm not sure if the distance was too much, or if they turned around, but once we got to a big shopping center, we ducked off the road and into a Sonic parking lot. We all sat in our cars for a little bit, watching to make sure we weren't going to get snuck up on, before getting out of the car to get some food and talk. Everyone, even the guys who had tried to act tough the whole time, were pretty shaken up. It took us a while to settle down enough to head home. As much as we talked it over, we just couldn't figure out what had happened. Eventually, we all went home, during what was a pretty silent car ride, exhaustion and lingering fear taking over. We didn't talk about it again for a very long time, and we never called the police, which honestly, as an adult now, I feel like we should have. I don't think about it often, only during the fall really, but when I do think about it, I ask myself, who chased us? Why was that town abandoned? Who owned those bikes? And where are they now? This happened 2 summers ago, while I was house sitting out in California for an older couple I had met at a conference for work. It had seemed like a dream scenario. The couple wanted to vacation in Hawaii for 2 weeks, but didn't want to board their cats, and I had been chatting with them about wanting to visit California again, where they happened to live, because I had loved it the first time I went, and we figured that we could mutually benefit if I came out and house sat for them. So I flew out there, and they showed me around for a few days, taught me how to care for the cats, 2 of them, one that was extremely shy and I barely saw, which is important later, and their plants. Gave me access to their house and cars. These people were so generous, and before I knew it, I had dropped them off at the airport and I was on my own. At first, it really was the dream vacation. I was staying in Oakland and making forays into San Fran, Sonoma, Monterey. In the mornings, I could walk out the front door and shortly be hiking the paths surrounding nearby Mount Diablo, and I was just ultra content with the world. I was so enamored by the area that I actually started looking into taking some steps to relocate out there even. But then one day, about halfway through my final week there, when I got back to the house, I felt really odd, almost like I shouldn't go inside. I shook it off and went inside anyway, because it was getting late and I needed to put out dinner for the cats. Once I was inside, I forced myself to ignore how off I felt, and I made some food for myself, went to bed, and was shocked to find the shy cat hiding under my bed and crying. This was the first time I had ever seen her close up. The entire time I'd been there, up to that point, she's never left my host's bedroom unless she didn't realize I was around. Again, I ignored feeling weird, and just assumed she had decided I was okay, and went to bed. I did start locking my bedroom door that night though. I also remembered that about halfway through that night, I thought I heard someone walking around in the gravel outside of my window. But after listening for a bit, I didn't hear anything else, and went back to sleep. The day after, in the morning, I still felt a little odd, but kept up with my plans for the day. I drove out to a little music festival in Sonoma, and went clothes shopping, and had an overall great day. When I got back to the house though, I found the front door locked in a way I hadn't left it. Basically, my host never locked the deadbolt, only the lower second lock, and that's the only lock that my key happened to work on. So I never messed with the deadbolt, but it was definitely locked. So, I had to call my hosts and find the hide-a-key, which to their credit safety-wise, was buried like a whole foot underneath a bush outside, and had definitely not been unearthed for a long time. So I used that, went inside, and kept the key with me just in case it happened again. And it did, but with a different door. This time, I had stepped out into the garage to get a drink, and when I turned around to go back into the house, the door was shut and locked. I could use my normal key on that door, but I was still pretty bewildered. My own cats are whack, so I think in my mind I was trying to come up with a way the cats could be locking me out of the house, but I was coming up empty. I decided I must have been misunderstanding how the locks worked, and just wrote it off and started checking and triple-checking locks when I went out of the house or out into the garage. That night, when I went to bed, the really awful feeling of unease was still there, and so was the shy cat, who was clearly unhappy to see me, but also wouldn't leave my room. But again, I just locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. The next morning, I felt awful. Nausea, body ache. I had no desire to leave the house, so I decided to stay in and Netflix for a day. This vacation stay was like a full 2 weeks, so I didn't feel like I was in any hurry to get all my touristy things in anyways. But as the day went on, I started to feel that feeling of wrongness again, and it morphed into feeling incredibly watched. Around mid-afternoon, it got to the point that I was so uneasy that even feeling awful, I decided to get out of the house for a bit to shake it off. I was getting a bit low on food, so I went to the grocery store and bought a couple food items that I didn't think would hurt my stomach, and as I started to leave the checkout, the cashier said the generic,
"Have a great evening."
And I just instantly started crying, shocking myself and the poor cashier, because I just had this intrusive thought that said, "You might be the last person to ever say that to me." When I got to my car, I was still crying, and my entire body was telling me not to drive back to the house. I couldn't not, though, because I did not want to neglect the cats. So I drove back, parked in the driveway, and convinced myself, after about half an hour, to just go open the front door. Once I did that, I thought I would get over it and be able to go in and at least feed the cats, and then maybe I'd go get a hotel room after. But my body physically would not let me inside. It was like I was stuck in the entryway. I then made a deal with myself. I would yell into the house saying I had already called the police and that they were on their way. In panic logic, I figured that would make anyone in the house leave. So I faced the inside of the house, looking down the hallway towards the bedrooms, and I did just that. The second I had finished saying, "They're almost here, so if you want to avoid being arrested, you need to leave now," the light in my host's room turned on, and I heard some banging. I immediately hightailed it back to the car, called the police for real, and proceeded to have a mental breakdown while talking to the dispatcher. Once they got there, they checked the house and didn't find anyone. But the double doors in my host's bedroom were left wide open. I'm so glad the cats didn't get out. And there was a pile of food wrappers in the corner behind the blinds, so they said it looked like someone had been there. What makes it so scary to me is that nothing was taken, and that based on the shape of the house, that would have been the perfect vantage point to see me in the living room as I stayed home sick. To explain this, the house was in an L shape, and from the windows into the garden that were in my host's bedroom, you could see into the living room windows. Also, the minute the police were gone, they said they couldn't prove anyone was there. There were no signs of forced entry, and we couldn't get a hold of my host immediately to verify if anything had been taken. Which once they were back, they verified that nothing had been taken. So they said they'd patrol a bit, but nothing else. The shy cat was right back in my host's bedroom, and I didn't see her again until I left to go back home. So, basically, I think the intruder had been there at least 2 days, forcing her to choose between the two strangers, and leading her to choose the one that was at least a little less strange, myself. It messed me up pretty bad, especially because they didn't catch the person and didn't seem to have any desire to look, and I still had to stay in that house for the next 3 days. Nothing else odd happened, and I didn't feel anything off the rest of the time I was there, but the damage was done. I've never felt completely safe in a home without doing a complete search before bed since. But I'm extremely glad my gut spoke up. I guess I'd rather have some residual anxiety than be dead. 4 years ago, my great-grandmother passed away at the age of 98. We were close, all the way into my adult years, so the death hit me hard. She lived in a 1-story house in a rural town half an hour outside of Springfield, Missouri. Her house sat on a large and heavily forested piece of land. There was a large hill several hundred feet behind the house that dropped off into a creek. I spent almost my entire childhood staying on this piece of land and had learned how to take care of it and the house. After the funeral services, I volunteered to stay and take care of the land while my family decided on what to do with it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to buy the land, so I wanted to spend as much time out there as I could. My first 3 days, I spent packing up items and cleaning the house. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, so I didn't have to worry about unwanted guests that would get in the way of my packing and disturb my personal way of mourning the loss of someone so close to me. The 4th day is when the odd events started occurring. I slept in a sleeping bag in the living room, and when I woke up, I immediately screamed. A few inches away from my face was a dead copperhead snake. It was normal for snakes and other small animals to get in the house, so seeing the snake wasn't surprising. It was the fact that it was so close to my face and it could have bitten me at any moment while I was sleeping. I briefly wondered why the snake had just come in the house and died because there were no physical signs that anything was wrong with it. So I threw it outside and continued with my day, and the weird event was almost forgotten. Later that night, I decided to go for a walk through the woods to enjoy the nice weather and reminisce about the good times I'd had in the woods and all the games I used to play. I was walking along an old path that led to a well. The path was narrow and was close to the drop-off that led to the creek. I heard a branch snap behind me and instinctively turned my head. I didn't see anything, so I assumed it was an animal and continued walking. Just a few minutes later, I heard a snap to my left and turned to look again, but I still didn't see anything. I started to worry that I was being stalked by something, but it was rare to see large animals in this area, so I continued walking. I heard a third snap directly in front of me, but now instead of being worried, I was upset. I was convinced that someone else was out here trying to scare me, so I shouted at what I assumed to be a person, "Go away!" and everything went uncomfortably silent. But I started to hear footsteps approaching in front of me, but I couldn't see anything. They got faster and faster until whoever or whatever it was running right at me. I covered my face with my arms and waited to be attacked by some invisible person, but the footsteps stopped. I slowly lowered my arms, but instead of seeing a person, a bobcat, or even a bear, I saw a gigantic spider in the middle of a web I hadn't noticed before. If I would have taken one more step, I would have ended up being bitten. I turned and ran as fast as I could through the overgrowth and back to the house. I was spooked, but I was out in the middle of the woods, and sometimes things like this happened. I knew this land and the house well, so I pushed through the night, and the next 2 days, nothing out of the ordinary happened. I started yard work my second week, staying out at the house, and it wasn't bad. I actually found some old trinkets from my childhood that I buried under a tree. While I was picking up fallen branches from a storm the previous night, I noticed a clump of hair that was caught in one of them. I remember its color being brown and black, and considered the possibility of being a rare encounter with a bear. But there were no tracks that I could see. I brushed it off again. I was starting to think that maybe someone else was staying on the property, and that upset me. I decided to stay up late to see if I could catch the person in the act. Nothing happened until around 2 a.m. I remember everything so vividly because of how terrified I was. It started with branches crunching and the sound of the wheelbarrow I'd been using earlier falling over. I readied my flashlight and a small knife just in case whoever it was got violent. I heard them step onto the front porch and pull at the screen door, but they quickly abandoned it and instead started walking around the house. I could hear them scraping something sharp against the house, and I was furious. I stood up and shone my flashlight at the nearest window that I assumed the person was standing near and shouted at them, "I have a weapon! Get off of this property now!" Everything stopped, and I was positive that whoever it was had left, until I heard something slam against the window so hard I was surprised it didn't break. My flashlight shined on the person, and at first I wasn't sure what I was looking at. It had long dark hair with eyes that were way too big for its face. Its skin was wrinkled and reminded me of a naked mole rat. It pressed its face against the glass and fogged it up with its breath. I heard it run around the house several times and bang on every wall, window, and the door every time it passed them. This went on for hours, and I was too scared to move or do anything. I was completely alone, being tormented by some strange monster. Every now and then, I would get the courage to shine my flashlight and caught a glimpse of the thing. Each time I saw it, it looked more animal-like. All I could do was cry and wait for it to go away. Finally, just after sunrise, the running and banging stopped, but I didn't dare move until well after 9 a.m. It took all my courage to open the front door and see what damage had been done to the house and yard after the terrifying experience from the night before. But there was nothing. No footprints, no scratches against the house, or broken or cracked windows. It was almost like I'd imagined the whole thing. But I knew what I saw and had experienced was real. Nothing else happened for the rest of my stay there, and by the end of the month, my grandfather came to pick me up and take care of the belongings I'd packed away. I was still terrified by what had happened, but I had almost convinced myself that I'd imagined it until my grandfather spoke to me. He told me he was happy that this land was being sold and how much he hated growing up here. When I asked him why, his answer seemed to validate my experience. Now, my grandfather is a serious, no-nonsense man. He was the type of person that stayed quiet, but when he did speak, you'd better listen because it was important. He was a hardened war veteran and devoted Christian, so things like paranormal and supernatural were just fairy tales to him. He made sure to let me and the rest of my family know that. He told me stories about how his mother, my great-grandmother, would always try to scare him and his sister with stories about the land being guarded by monsters. The story says that these monsters, hybrids is what he called them, were the children of falsely accused witches. The people living in the area back when this was going on claimed that the children were part witch and part animal and needed to be killed, so they were left in the forest to die. He said that when the witch children died, they came back as spirits and claimed the woods as their own, and any unwelcome visitors would be tortured until they were literally scared to death, just how their falsely accused mothers had been scared when they had been killed. My grandfather said he didn't believe in much outside of his religion, but he believed that the hybrids were real and that he had been tormented by one when he was trying to go hunting in the woods for the first time and shot his first deer. He believed he had upset the hybrids by killing an innocent animal and never stepped foot on the land with a weapon, and they finally left him alone. Maybe this is a foolish thing to believe, but I believe that the story my grandfather told me is true, simply because we both had similar terrifying experiences. If I had had a camera, I would have tried to take a picture of the creature, or if I could draw, I would submit a picture of the drawing. I remember every detail about what I saw, and it will be burned into my memory forever. All of my childhood memories seem tainted now because of this experience, and now I don't think I'm going to miss the land as much as I first thought. It didn't take long for the land and the house to be sold. The hybrids, or whatever is out there, can be somebody else's nightmare. One night was more than enough for me. For some understanding, this happened in the United States. It was the summer of 2012. My longtime boyfriend and I had recently gotten married. Even though we were dirt poor college students and lived in a dinky apartment, we were having a blast. That particular summer, we gathered with our friends at the local movie theater almost every weekend. There was one just down the street from our apartment that had really cheap movie tickets. A night out that was under $10 was certainly within our budget. Anyway, one Thursday night, I received a call from this group of friends inviting us to watch the midnight premiere of the newest Batman movie. I had just finished working a 12-hour shift and was pretty tired. I almost refused the invitation and thought of crashing in my apartment instead. However, I didn't want to miss out on the fun, and it was a movie I'd wanted to see for a while anyway. Certainly it wouldn't do any harm to stay up later than usual and miss a few hours of sleep, right? At 10:30 p.m., we met at the theater. We passed large cardboard cutouts of Catwoman and Batman as we walked inside, greeted by the smell of buttery popcorn and the chatter of excited moviegoers. The ticket booth was to the right of the entrance, and just above that was an electronic list of movies being played. The 12 a.m. showing of The Dark Knight Rises was displayed up there in bright red letters. Being paranoid that the tickets would sell out quickly, one of my friends swung by earlier that day and purchased tickets for all of us. We bypassed the ticket line and went straight to the ticket taker. She smiled at us and kindly directed us to Theater 9, which was on the right side of the lobby. If only I had known what I do now, that among the crowds, a killer was lurking. That as I walked across that tacky red and purple carpet towards Theater 9, I could have been walking to my death. I think about it often now, what I would have done had I known. Pulled the fire alarm, called the police, screamed for people to run away. But of course, I had no way of knowing what was about to happen. Oblivious to the peril I was putting myself in, I pushed open the doors for Theater 9 without giving it a second thought. The hallway in this theater was shaped like a U, and you could go either right or left. Theater 9 was the largest screening room in the building, perfect for accommodating the crowds that midnight premieres brought in. The screen was motionless and gray. Not even the previews had started yet, because there was still a good hour and a half to go until the movie actually started. We entered on the right side, so all the seats were to our left. I remember being surprised at just how packed the theater already was. Just about every seat was filled, much to our dismay. At first it seemed like we wouldn't find a spot to sit together. Now, the way this theater was set up, there was a section of seats right in front of the screen. The area was flat, and there were about 5 rows of seating in this section. A lot of seats in that section were empty, but sitting right in front of the movie screen sucks, and none of us wanted to sit there. One of my friends then spotted a row with 5 empty seats, all next to each other, perfect for the amount of people we had. These seats were about 3 to 4 rows up from where the seating rows start to elevate. We ran up the stairs before someone could take the seats and filed in. My husband, Brock, sat in the 5th seat. I sat next to him, and my friend Samantha sat next to me on my right side. Her boyfriend Tommy sat next to her, and another friend named Leo sat in the aisle seat. We spent the next several minutes casually chatting, joking around, and laughing. After a little while, my friends went back to the lobby to buy drinks and that addicting movie theater popcorn. While they were gone, Brock and I passed the time by people watching. The theater was bright since the lights weren't dimmed yet, and I could see everyone clearly. There were a lot of people dressed in Batman t-shirts and hoodies. One person even had a mask and one of those shirts with an attached cape. There were a lot of kids in attendance as well, which wasn't surprising because even though it was a Thursday night, it was summer vacation, so that meant no school the next day. Of all the people I saw, the person I will never forget was the little girl sitting in our same row, a few chairs away. She was really cute, blonde with blue eyes, and passed us several times on our way to the lobby, each time coming back with various snacks and popcorn. Overall, people seemed very excited to see the movie, and the room was filled with energy and laughter. After what seemed like an eternity of waiting, the lights started to dim and the previews began. Just like every movie I've seen before, a quick animation flashed across the screen, reminding us to get refreshments from the lobby. We were already devouring that popcorn like ravenous animals. To silence our cell phones, and to make sure we know where the emergency exits are. The animation had this ugly CGI cat in a tuxedo that was sitting in a movie theater. I casually glanced at the bright green emergency exit signs that were on the left and right sides of the movie screen. I didn't think much of the reminder, like usual. After that, I only remember one preview for The Man of Steel. The others, I'm not sure what they were about. When the movie started, the theater erupted into cheering and was clapping. The title of the movie, The Dark Knight Rises, exploded onto the screen. This was followed by the scene where Bane is hijacking a plane. I thought this scene was pretty cool, and it caught my interest right away. Only when the movie started to get a little less interesting did I remember just how tired I was. I decided I would close my eyes at the more boring parts to get a little bit of rest. I had been awake for 20 hours at that point, so I was rightfully sleepy. My eyes were closed for most of the duration of Batman and Catwoman's encounter. I don't really remember what was going on in that part of the movie. Perhaps some of you have seen it and know what I'm talking about. Anyway, when I opened my eyes again, Bruce Wayne was on his computer digging up information on Catwoman. This is the last scene I saw. I never got to watch the rest of the movie. All of a sudden, a loud bang erupted from the left side of the theater. I sort of screamed a little because it startled me. A strange smell started to fill the auditorium. It was like the smell of a firework, so I thought it was a cherry bomb or something similar. Had someone thrown fireworks into the crowd as a prank? Then, down near the right side of the movie screen, the dark silhouette of a person caught my attention. They were just a black frame against the bright movie screen. A series of flashing lights was coming from this person. It was a weird moment where time literally slowed down and everything went strangely quiet. I was completely frozen, unable to move and really unable to think at all. It was like my brain had stopped working entirely. Brock caught on immediately to what was happening, and he grabbed me. He pulled me to the ground and lay on top of me, shielding me with his own body. At this point, time and sound returned to me. I could hear the gunshots ringing out across the theater. People were screaming. The movie was still playing on top of it all, creating a chaotic explosion of sound. I realized the flashing lights I had seen were bullets flying out of a gun barrel. An instant sensation of adrenaline flooded my body. There was absolutely nothing I could do except lay there and hope to God that the bullets I heard ripping through seats and walls wouldn't go through me too. At one point, shrapnel hit my head, cutting off a good chunk of my hair. And as I reached for the spot to make sure it wasn't bleeding, hot pieces of metal fell into my hand. I was lying face up, so I could see everything that was happening. The lights from a still-playing movie danced across the ceiling and walls. My friends were on the floor with me. Our unfinished bucket of popcorn was spilled all across the floor. Leo had his legs sticking out into the aisle because there wasn't enough room for him to hide completely behind the seats. At some point, Samantha's water bottle, which had been in the cup holder between our seats, exploded. Water splashed all over my face. The smell of gun smoke was overwhelming. Riot-grade tear gas made me cry and caused me to cough uncontrollably. There was another smell too, the horrific metallic smell of blood that I'll never forget. I remember my lower body feeling wet all of a sudden. For some reason, I thought this came from the leaking water bottle, but soon realized this wasn't the case. All of a sudden, things were strangely quiet. The bullets had stopped for some reason. Tommy shouted,
"Let's get out of here!"
We took advantage of the opportunity and made a run for it. We ran down the stairs, across the front of the screen towards a bright green exit sign. We crammed into a small closet-like space where the door was. It was so dark we had a hard time finding it. We were screaming and slamming on the walls to find the door, blinded by tear gas and dumbfounded by shock. Then finally, my hands felt the metal door handle, and I pushed against it with all my strength. The door flew open, and the light of a nearby streetlight flooded our eyes. We pushed against the door so hard that we all fell over onto the concrete. Samantha lost her pink flip-flops just outside this doorway. As I scrambled to my feet and literally ran for my life, I realized my legs were red, absolutely soaked with blood. It was like I dipped my legs into a bathtub full of it. I checked my body all over and realized I wasn't injured at all. Where had this blood come from? I looked behind me and realized that the blood was my husband's. He had been shot in the leg. A massive, gaping hole had ripped through the lower half of Brock's right leg. His foot was barely hanging on and dangled lifelessly. Leo and a young man I didn't recognize were carrying Brock because after falling outside the door, he lost all his strength and he couldn't walk. I was completely shocked. I had no idea he had been injured, especially since he was right behind me the whole time and managed to escape the theater all by himself. How he did it on a single foot, I'll never know. At this point, I screamed. It was so loud that it alerted nearby construction workers. At the back of the theater, there was a narrow parking lot, followed by a grassy lawn, and then the street beyond that. The construction workers were doing road repair on this street, but as soon as they heard my scream and saw us running, they stopped working and watched what was going on. I'm not sure why this is such a vivid part of my memory. Anyway, they carried Brock along the back sidewalk all the way to the end, where the corner of the building is. This was quite a distance, several dozen feet. My husband then collapsed from exhaustion and pain, saying he couldn't move anymore. He lay down, and a puddle of blood started to form beneath him. I looked back and realized we had left a trail of blood leading from the door all the way to our current position. I was trembling. I knelt beside Brock and glanced around to see who else was injured. Tommy had been shot in the knee and the hip and was further away in the parking lot. The teenager who held my husband was also injured. His dad and mom were with him. His mom was sitting against the wall and looked like she was going to pass out. She was bleeding from several places. That family escaped at the same time we did. I guess they heard the bullet stop and decided to make a run for it too. We were all lucky, because the shooting was still going on inside. I had to take off my shirt and use it to stop the bleeding. I'll never forget how lifeless and limp his leg felt, and I imagine that's what a dead body must feel like. I got blood all over my hands and arms. The police showed up really fast. I'd say we were only outside for a minute or two before the red and blue sirens filled the night and rushed to our location. We were literally a block away from the police station. A female officer stood by us the whole time until paramedics arrived, which took a very long time. Brock was one of the last people to be taken to a hospital. He was bleeding out for almost 20 minutes before an ambulance pulled up on the same street with the roadwork. At this point, he had become almost unresponsive and was on the verge of unconsciousness. Several massive guys came hauling ass across the grass with a stretcher, loaded him onto it, and then ran with him back to the waiting ambulance. I wasn't able to go with him because there was another injured person in the ambulance, and it was too crowded. I wandered around to the front of the theater alone, unsure of where my friends had went. My blood-stained shirt and a pool of blood were left behind on the corner of that sidewalk. Walking through the crowds felt like a dream. I couldn't believe what had just happened. People were in hysterics and crying. A lot of people such as me were covered in blood, and like me, I'm pretty sure the blood staining their skin and clothes wasn't their own. A lot of people seemed to notice how lonely and dazed I looked, so they kept me company and even offered me a ride to different hospitals to find Brock, because I hadn't been told what hospital he was taken to. I hung around these people for a while as police swarmed the area and asked us what we saw inside the theater. The whole parking lot was on lockdown, and we weren't going to be allowed to leave anytime soon. It was around 2 a.m., so it was very dark outside still, and I was pretty cold, wearing only an undershirt and shorts. The flashing red and blue lights of what seemed like 100 police cars were blinding. I remember seeing a big police vehicle pull up that said something like Crime Scene Investigation Unit. I think that's really when it sank in and hit me. I started to get sick to my stomach and wanted to vomit, but somehow I was able to hold it back. Eventually, police started letting people leave. I jumped into the back of my truck and booked the fuck out of there. I was in such a panic that I didn't even think to go back to my apartment, grab my cell phone, which I had forgotten, and call my parents or someone else to help me. I was angry, upset, scared, and most of all, still in a state of shock. Was I really going to lose Brock only a month shy of our first wedding anniversary because of some psychopath with a gun? Thankfully, by the time dawn rolled around, I found the hospital he was treated in. This was in the next city over, maybe 45 minutes from the theater, if you're going the speed limit. I was so happy to be there, and the hospital staff were all so welcoming and understanding. After making sure I wasn't injured as well, they let me wait in the ICU room that Brock would be placed in when he was done recovering from surgery. I was so glad he was alive. Brock and Tommy both survived, though many others weren't so lucky. I found out the following day, after some much-needed sleep on a hospital couch, that 12 people were killed in the shooting and over 70 injured. I remember they first thought 15 people were killed, but the real number was 12. The little blonde girl sitting in my row did not survive. She died in the theater no more than a few feet from us. She had been shot multiple times. a heartbroken police officer who cried during his court testimony, tried unsuccessfully to save her by carrying her out of the theater and having her sent to a hospital. Tommy was rushed to a different hospital in the back of a police car. He underwent surgery and made a full recovery. The bullet missed his hip bone and narrowly missed his urinary tract and bladder. According to the surgeons, my husband lost almost half his blood. Brock made it to the hospital just in time. Any later, and he would have died. He underwent several blood transfusions and was in the hospital 21 days. The wound to his leg was severe enough that they had to amputate it after trying unsuccessfully to save it. It's been so long since the shooting happened that my husband, friends, and I have been able to recover from it somewhat. The event was pretty horrifying and has left us scarred for sure. I wouldn't consider that part of the story to be creepy, though. No, the creepy part is the shooter himself. I later learned much about him from the murder trial that would follow in the coming years. Though my encounter with this man was very brief, he has affected my life greatly. Just to know that people like this exist is disturbing. He is certainly one twisted individual that I never want to see again. I learned everything from watching the televised trial that took place in early 2015. This guy was going to school for neuroscience or something in California. I guess he was a pretty smart guy. However, for some reason, he had a huge obsession with killing people and had a stalker mentality. After dropping out of his university, he moved to my state and chose my local theater to commit a mass shooting. Before that, he was planning on hiding along remote hiking trails up in the mountains, jumping people, pulling them into the woods and killing them there, though he never went through with that idea. He stalked my theater for months and had this shooting all planned out for the night of July 20th. Though I never saw him before this, it's unnerving to think this guy could have been watching us every time we went to the theater, and we would have never known it. We were completely unaware of what he had planned against us. This completely ruined my sense of security, because who knows what the stranger next to you is planning on doing to you. I came very close to the shooter, but I never actually saw his face in person until I was forced to testify in court. Of course, I saw his mugshots on television, but while in the theater, I only saw him as a dark silhouette in the shadows, like a demonic figure rendered from the darkest and most sinister nightmare. He was even in the hallway that we passed upon running for the emergency exit. The only thing stopping him from killing us there and then was his jammed assault rifle. To commit this crime, he ordered a few thousand rounds of ammunition, riot gear, and armor, tear gas, an assault rifle, and a shotgun. He took pictures of himself, which were shown in court, wearing all of this gear like some sick trophy and holding up these weapons with a menacing smile. He dyed his hair orange and put in these creepy black contacts while making devilish faces into his camera, something that made me sick just looking at. Before driving to the theater with all this gear in his car, he booby-trapped his entire apartment and set it to explode if anyone opened the door. Then, once at the theater, he posed as a moviegoer and even bought a ticket for the movie. I think his ticket had Theater 8 on it, which was next door, but Theater 9 had more people in it, so he went to number 9 instead. He was in the first few rows. I must have passed him several times in the lobby while he was there. Maybe he had seen me too. At some point during the movie, he got up and went through the side exit, which didn't have an alarm for some reason, kept it propped open with something, then went to his car to put on all his armor and grabbed his weapons. Then, he came back inside and started shooting. When we escaped the theater, we ran past his white car, which was parked right at the exit. We didn't even notice it. At some point, he came outside, and he would have seen us there on the concrete. I don't know what stopped him from shooting people that were outside too, but he could have easily ended us there, and then if he wanted to. I think the hardest part for me was facing this twisted individual in court. I'll never forget rising as they called my name, walking down the center row past my family, other survivors, and crowds of news-hungry media personnel. I sat right across from him, maybe only 10 feet away. While his orange hair was gone and he wasn't wearing black contacts, being so close to him was a creepy and uncomfortable experience. My encounters with this man are certainly ones I will never forget. I can now say that I've come face to face with a true, deranged psychopath. He just had this blank stare in his eyes the whole time. If eyes truly are the windows to the soul, then his soul was filled with nothing but a cold indifference for those he had murdered and harmed. He wouldn't even look at me. Sitting across from him in court was the second time I had knowingly been in the same room with this man, a man who had tried to take my life, but thankfully failed, a man who would end up spending forever behind bars, when at the end of it all, he was sentenced to 3,318 years in prison for his crimes. Life sentence. This is to the man who tried to kill me. The man who has caused countless nightmares and fueled the fires of my paranoia. The man who hurt my friends and family, causing years of untold grief for my husband because he will never walk the same again. The man who stole the innocence and joy from a 6-year-old child who went into that theater alive and came out dead. To the man who carried out the worst mass shooting in Colorado history. I hope you rot in prison.